Hello everyone! Welcome to Think Outside the Board. If it's not your first time here, then welcome back and welcome to another edition of the Kickstarter Weekly. Today's episode is going to cover games that are completing their funding from March 14th through March 20th. As always, links to the individual campaigns are down in the description section. You can go down there, click on the name of a campaign if you're interested in it, and we'll take you right to the campaign, whether that's on Kickstarter or on Gamefound. And we have about half of each this time around. Now, in addition to talking to you about the currently running crowdfunding campaigns, I also use these videos as an opportunity to talk to you about games that I've played, games that I have personally backed from the previous video, and games that I've acquired into my collection. So I've got 5 different crowdfunding campaigns I'm going to be talking to you about today. But before I do that, I'm first going to talk to you about the 2 games that I've played since the last video. First on the list is Descent: Legends of the Dark. Now this is the big box, it looks like a cube, newest iteration of Descent. It's not 3rd edition, it's kind of its own tangent side project. And in fact, even though the box is huge, it's got a 16 campaign scenario in it, which is replayable. You can even play 2 campaigns at the same time because the app will let you run 2 different campaigns simultaneously. Now, despite all of that, the fact that the game is pretty big on its own, it comes with a big Act 1 printed on the side of the box, which would seem to indicate that they're going to be doing, I don't know, how many acts are usually in things? Usually 3 if you're talking about something more modern, and if you're going back to Shakespeare, usually he had about 5 acts in his plays. So I don't know how many more games we're going to be getting in the Descent: Legends of the Dark series. They may not have completely decided yet based on, how the first game does. But I'm going to talk to you about what I think about that game so far. Now, I've mentioned this game in a few other videos that I've done. We got through the first 3 scenarios. And then, very recently, my fiancée Kristen decided that she didn't really like the game or the gameplay, and she wasn't going to be continuing with it. So we took this as an opportunity. We'd actually lost the 3rd scenario just by the skin of our teeth. And so we decided we would restart since Kristen wasn't going to be playing with us anymore. We'd also been playing 3 characters. You can play up to 4. So my friend Ryan, who was the 3rd member of our group, and I decided that we would restart our campaign and we're going to each play 2 characters from now on. Now, in the beginning of the game, you have 4 characters in your party, and then very quickly you add in 2 more characters. So you basically have 6 characters to choose from. One of the really cool things about the game is that the characters kind of all level up together. So if you're playing, one character for a period of time and then you decide you want to switch to another character, you can do that and you won't be playing a character that's low level where it'll be a detriment to the party. So the party kind of levels up together, and then you can kind of pick and choose on each scenario who you want to play. I really like that. I think that's one of the best parts of the game. In fact, the game kind of encourages you to play different characters from scenario to scenario. And I think especially in, let's say a 4-player game, that's great because players tend to then have more of a responsibility over the entire party and a better working knowledge of all of the characters because they've played them. So I think it just promotes a better kind of group dynamic and a dynamic where people feel more personally responsible for all of the characters, even the ones that they're not playing. Another thing I really like about the game is the upgrade system and the app. The app works in such a way that it keeps track of everything for you. So a lot of the combat rolls and calculations and the way it determines damage, that's all done within the app. It also keeps track of the weapons and gear and upgrades that your characters have. So when you go to start a game, it'll ask you to choose your equipment. And you'll also get to choose some of these extra cards that you may have access to depending on the experience of the characters. So you'll choose those things at the beginning of the game, then you'll take the components, and then from then on, the game just does it all in-app. So there's very little to think about as a player. There's also very little upkeep to do as a player. And that's generally good because it keeps the game moving and it has less fiddly work for the players to do. It can be bad in that it leaves the players with very little decision-making spaces. So, you can go around and craft your gear and kind of figure out stuff before the adventure. Once you actually get into the adventure and you're playing it, there aren't too many decisions for the players to be making. And I think that's one of the reasons that my fiance Kristen decided to bail. Now, the main mechanics in the game include some dice, which are these cool custom etched dice. They're different for different races, different classes. So depending on who you're playing, you'll have a die for attacking and a die for defending. You'll just roll that die. And then based on the symbols that you roll, you'll be able to activate different player abilities that you have. The other cool central mechanic really is the fact that everything is double-sided. So your little player card is double-sided. You start out with 2 different weapons. They give you just enough sleeves in the game. I think it's like 6 sleeves, so that you can, for each character, put their 2 weapons into a sleeve. And the reason that you want to do this, that you have like a double-sided weapon and a player board that has 2 sides to it, and any other cards that you get with abilities will have 2 sides as well, is because the central mechanic of the game is flipping your cards or your player board. See, when you're playing and you're doing things, you may be taking certain kinds of tokens that affect you in negative ways, and those will go onto the card or onto your player board. And generally, the only way to remove them in most cases, and the easiest way to remove them in general, is to flip that card or that player board where you've stored those negative condition tokens. Once you flip it, those conditions will fall off. Some of the conditions have rules where if they fall off, you take some damage, but generally that's the best way to get rid of all of those tokens, which will tend to give you a negative ongoing condition, from turn to turn, round to round. So you flip that, everything falls off, you're good to go again, but doing that takes an action. So generally you're going to want to be flipping those cards when you're out of combat. The other thing that you'll be doing in the game, the other resource that you'll be dealing with in general, is called fatigue. And fatigue is something that you can put on your player board or cards to trigger actions on the cards. You can also do that if you get a symbol on a die that looks like a plus. It's called advantage. And what that means is it's not a full hit. There's another icon for a full hit. But if you get this advantage symbol, you can take a fatigue onto one of your cards or player boards, and you'll convert that advantage symbol into a hit. And then the number of hits that you have when you're attacking someone, you'll input that into the app, and the app will use that to create a damage result. So it's not 1-for-1. There's a range in there that's somewhat random to make the game a little more exciting, I think, and give you the feeling of rolls even after you've rolled. So it's not a direct kind of calculation, but it'll give you a range. So sometimes when if you have 3 hits, if you put those 3 hits in, sometimes you'll get a couple points of damage. Sometimes you'll have a better conversion and you'll get more damage. But I really like that idea of kind of managing these different sides of your abilities and different weapons and being able to flip them to change the abilities that you have access to and also discard those negative tokens. Now, other than that, you're looking at a fairly standard dungeon crawler with miniatures where you're going to be dealing with things like line of sight and just, fighting enemies, doing damage. They're doing damage on you. You're moving around this board. There's also terrain that you can interact with. It does various things. Things may heal you. You may find materials. You may find treasures and things. And again, the app will then log all of that, so you don't have to worry about it as a player while you're playing a scenario. And then when you finish a scenario, you'll go to kind of like an end game screen, a between scenario screen, where you can do things like buy and sell goods and craft goods. So I like all of that in general, but the big problem with the game is that it takes so many choices away from the players. And this is ultimately why Kristen didn't want to play it anymore. Because when the turn would get to her, she really wouldn't have too much to do. Normally it was, you have 3 actions on your turn. One of them is a maneuver, which is a move. And so in combat, you have to maneuver and then attack twice, generally. And attacking basically means you're going to roll a die. You're going to figure out what you want to convert into hits if you can. You might have a charge ability that you can use. And then you're just going to swipe the app and attack. And that's basically it. So it's not that exciting, really, as a player. I was putting out the miniatures on the board as they came out, and my friend Ryan has been putting out the cardboard terrain. And so we were more involved, I think, in the creation of the board. So that maybe gave us a little more agency and investment in the game that we were playing. But there really isn't that much compelling gameplay. There's just enough player choices with taking on fatigue to improve hits, flipping your cards in your player mat to get rid of fatigue and negative tokens, and then just deciding what's the best way to approach the various enemies. But the gameplay is really minimal. Now, Ryan and I are really enjoying it, I think, because we just like dungeon crawlers, and it's fun to kind of go into a dungeon and build out the dungeon as you play and explore it and interact with things and interact with the miniatures and fight things. It's all fun stuff, but not things that you wouldn't find in other dungeon crawlers. The app is definitely limiting for some people if you don't like apps. And the app itself, as I said, while it does a lot of the bookkeeping for you, which is good, it also takes away a lot of gameplay choices. And in addition to that, I think the other biggest problem in the game is the writing. So, people initially were complaining about the art on the game. It's fine. It's its own thing. It might not be the art that I would commission for the game, but I like it in its own way. It's not a problem. That's okay. The writing for the game is bad. It's pretty bad. And there's a lot of talking in the game. And they did employ voice actors for some of it. So when you go into some of the big scenarios, like the first scenario, you'll kind of have a cutscene across whatever you're using for your app, and there'll be voice actors, and that's nice. But in this scenario, when you're doing things, and sometimes after the scenario, there's a lot of talking of the characters, and that is not voice acted. So you're going to get these screens with these characters talking. There's a lot of dialogue. It's not well written. It's kind of the worst of the kind of dialogue that you would see in like JRPGs that had, a lot of eccentricity to the dialogue, characters that were kind of childish, saying things that were somewhat nonsensical, characters getting very kind of caught up in little interpersonal dramas that are very, very inconsequential. And so there's just a lot to read through. And depending on how you have the game set up and where players are sitting, you may need to read to the other players if they can't see the screen that well. So it stops the momentum of the game, and it makes you go through a lot of these screens that feel like a lot of those JRPGs that would have these, kind of text-heavy cutscenes and screens where characters are talking. And it's just, the writing is bad. The writing is bad. The writing is bad. The writing is bad. It really is. It's awful. It's awful writing. And I don't know whether they were kind of going for that, whether they wanted to kind of imitate and capture that style of game. So maybe for some people, it will trigger some kind of nostalgia. But for me, I'd rather just have good writing. And I'd rather have writing that's kind of shorter conversations, especially when you're all gathered or focused around an app, and some players may not be able to see it as well as others, particularly when you have this kind of growing board state that's going to be taking up a lot of the table. So, as we were playing it, we had the iPad set up so that Kristen could see it, and Ryan and I would be bringing out things, but as the table kind of grew later and later in the scenario, we really had no choice but to push that iPad farther and farther away from Kristen. And we didn't pass it around because the interaction with the app was pretty minimal. You really just kind of needed to swipe once you rolled and you were going to attack. So that's something that we could do for her. I do think that is a barrier to playing the game and is going to be for some people. So previously when I've been talking about this game, I've been rating it an 8.5 because I've been enjoying the gameplay, even though it's simple. I like dungeon crawlers. I think a lot of that may have had to do with just my enjoyment of the game. But already at 3 scenarios in of the 16 scenario campaign, it's becoming more and more obvious the sort of problems and limitations of the game and the simplicity of the game. Now, we've started over, so I'm going to be playing the first 3 scenarios again, which means it's going to be even longer until I get deep into the game and find out maybe if it does get complex with better decisions. I know it will to some degree because you will be leveling up your character. There are these cool kind of feats that you can play as you're doing the game, which will unlock things for you. You also get experience, and once you have experience, you can use that experience to bring different cards into the scenario with you. So as you play, you will have more stuff. You will get to trigger more things. There will be some more complexity there in that. But I don't think that the game's ever really going to get that complex, and it is so app-dependent and app-driven. I think some people may have a concern that what if the app isn't supported in a few years? And I think that's a legitimate concern. For me, I really wanted to get this game played, so we're playing it now. I'll finish it. I think if I decide to keep it, it will be only because I want to replay it at some point, maybe in a more difficult mode on a live streaming session, like as we're doing campaign games. If I decide not to hold on to it for that reason, though, I will be selling it. And I agree with people who are a little bit worried about app dependency. I do think that technology evolves so quickly. You know, it is so fast these days how quickly laptops, computers, and phones kind of upgrade and outpace themselves. That shouldn't be as much of a problem for an app because you can just keep putting it on newer platforms if the technology itself increases. Yet that still requires work to do. So the game company still needs to be in business, and they need to be invested enough in the game to be making those upgrades. And certainly if we're talking about a game like this in, 10 or 20 years, I think it's really unlikely that the app will still be functional at that point. And for a game like this, you need the app to play it. There is no way to kind of just play the game on your own. So consequently, my rating has slid from an 8.5 down to an 8, just to accommodate, I think, some of those factors. It may go down more as I play through the entire 16 game campaign, but if the campaign becomes, really compelling and interesting, it could go back up again. So I think 8.0 is a really solid score for now. And in terms of it's going to continue being an 8 for quite a while until I get at least halfway through the campaign. So, that 8 is going to be there for a while. But I think in terms of whether this is a game for you or not, it's really going to depend on what you think about app dependency and how much the, kind of bad or juvenile writing of the game lands with you. I wouldn't mind it as much if there were less of it. It's just there's a lot of it to get through. And when I'm playing video games like that, I tend to, forward through it rather quickly. Like I get the information and I forward through it pretty quickly. In a game like this, though, it's so much the flavor of the game. I think less would have been more. I think they should have just written maybe less, had to be better writing, and not worried so much about trying to maybe build up the characters, the relationships through these long cutscenes that they didn't even hire voice actors for. So 8.0 for now. I'll probably mention this game again in future Kickstarter weeklies as we're going through different scenarios, but I probably won't talk about it too much more until I get maybe halfway through the campaign and hopefully have more to add to it. So 8.0, Descent Legends of the Dark. If you like dungeon crawlers and you like these kinds of games, it's still a lot of fun. Just know that it doesn't really have compelling gameplay choices like something like Gloomhaven. It's not as heavy as something like that. And you are very much bound to the app in terms of player choices and just the experience of it. So I think depending on how you feel about that will determine whether or not this is a game for you. It's also not cheap. So take that into mind. I picked it up on a daily deal where I think it was more than 50% off. And I don't know that I would have done that if I hadn't found it for such a good price. So I'm actually really enjoying playing it, but that's with a lot of caveats and lowered expectations and just kind of enjoying it for what it is. Now, the next game that I played this period is Sentinels of the Multiverse Definitive Edition. And this is something that my friend Ryan, the same guy that I'm playing Descent Legends of the Dark, backed when the Kickstarter was first out a year or two ago. There's actually another Kickstarter running right now for it, for the expansion. So even though it's the definitive edition, it was only the definitive edition for the base game. And when they made that definitive edition, they did take certain elements from other expansions and import it into the base game. So if you're familiar with the old game, there are some characters and things like that come from other expansions. So it is a more meaty base game, I guess, than the previous one. The other big upgrade is, I know that in the previous version of the game, it was, I think, the designer's first kind of big project. And the art wasn't as great as it could be, and the iconography and the text on the cards were complicated in that it wasn't always obvious what things did. There wasn't a good system of iconography and things like that. So you'd kind of have to read the text on the card every time to understand what the card does. If you played the game a lot, you'd start to know that, but whenever you were playing with new people, it was just hard to get the game played because of all of this text on the cards. And that was how the information was communicated. It just wasn't a great system. So this completely refines that, makes it much more user-friendly, and it gives you the same base game, the Definitive Edition, that existed previously, with a lot of little extras pulled in from some of the other expansions. Now, that said, it doesn't include those other expansions. There are a bunch of other expansions out there. So there is currently this Kickstarter running for, I think it's called the Rook City, and that is going to bring in, a new version of Rook City, probably with some additional upgrades and maybe some things pulled from other things as well. I like the game a lot. I'm going to give it... I'm trying to decide between an 8.0 or an 8.5. I think I will give it... I just can't decide. I'm going to give it an 8.5. And I think the game plays smooth like butter. And I really like the new version of the game. I like everything about it. I like the tokens, I like the cards, I like the art. You're playing these superhero characters, you're fighting against a super villain, and it's deck building or deck construction. I haven't really sat down to figure out which it is. I think depending on who you're talking to and their definition of deck building, it may or may not qualify, but it's in that area, deck building, deck construction. So here's the thing for me. I'm on the fence as to whether or not I'm going to back this game and the Rook City expansion through the Kickstarter that's up right now. And the reason is that while I really do like the game, it has a lot in common with Marvel Champions. It also has a lot in common with Aeon Zen, which I love, and I own everything for that game, which means that it also has a lot in common with Astro Knights, which is the kind of reskinning that they did of Aeon Zen recently. It was just up on Kickstarter into a kind of futuristic space setting. And I actually backed that. Even though I own all of Aeon Zen, I backed Astro Knights because I like it so much. I'm up for a retheming and seeing how they kind of tweak some of the gameplay. But I don't know that you really need all of those games in your collection. I mean, those are 4 games that have a lot of overlap. Marvel Champions, Sentinels of the Universe, Aeon Zen, and now Astro Knights. So even though I really enjoyed Sentinels of the Universe, considering that I have those other 3 games, and I also have Arkham Horror, the card game, which has a lot of kind of in common with Marvel Champions, you just don't need that many copies of kind of the same game in a collection. Now that said, because I already have those other games, most of those other games, that could keep me from backing this one, but I'm still considering it because I do like it a lot. And if you don't have those other games, and if you played this before, if this is something that you like, or even if you don't know it, if you don't have those other games, this is a really good one. So I love Aeon Zen. I'm always going to recommend Aeon Zen to people. Aeon Zen and Thunderstone Quest are probably my 2 favorite deck builders. But, maybe you don't like the fantasy theme of Aeon Zen. Maybe you don't like the way the cards work. In Aeon Zen, you have these little kind of portal cards that go over your abilities, and you kind of turn them, and you can activate them based on how you've turned them. It's a whole additional mechanic in Aeon Zen that I think is really cool, but maybe someone else doesn't like. So if you're in that boat, or even if you just like Aeon Zen and you want another game like Aeon Zen, I would very much recommend Sentinels of the Universe. I'm on my own fence with this, just trying to decide whether or not I want to bring a duplicate kind of a game into my collection while I've got so many games that I'm really trying to push games out of my collection. But if you're not in that situation, it is a really, really good game. And if you like card battlers, cooperative card battlers, with interesting choices to be made and deck building, it's a really good game. And I really enjoyed our play of it. And I think also because I know Ryan owns it and he loves it, and chances are he's likely to get all of it as it's put on Kickstarter piecemeal over the next few years. I know I can probably play it with him, so I don't necessarily need my own copy. But 8.5, right now I'm thinking it's a better game than Descent. So, yeah. If you like hearing about the games that I'm playing, if you like hearing about the games that I've played and my opinions on them, next week's video is going to have even more because I have a game day this Sunday. We're playing Beyond the Sun, Tekenyu, Obelisk of the Sun, and then if there's time, In Too Deep. And then next week I'm going to be on a little birthday trip with my fiance to Carmel, and we're taking some smaller games to play while we're there for my birthday. So I think I'm going to be breaking out Caper Europe, Canvas. We probably won't put the Reflections expansion in because we haven't played the base game yet, so we'll probably just stick to the base game. Three Sisters, which is a cool-looking new roll and write game from the guys who did Fleet, and then possibly Vivid Memories. So some kind of lighter games that are smaller, and we can play on our trip without it kind of taking up our trip because we have a lot of other things that we want to do too. That said, let's continue now on to the main part of the video, which is the 5 currently running crowdfunding campaigns. So first on this list is Factory 42 For the Greater Good Edition. This is on Gamefound, not Kickstarter. They had a minimum required funding goal for this game of $9,000. They currently have $13,500, and that is 1.5 times that minimum required funding goal. Now, Factory 42 is going to complete its funding on Monday, March 14th. The game plays 2 to 5 players in about 1.5 to 2 hours. It is a heavy game, and I'm setting the risk associated with this campaign at medium-high. Now, thematically, the game takes 1920s Soviet-era propaganda, combines it with fantasy literature to create a game where it's following the work week of these Marxist dwarves in a steampunk industrial setting. So you've got the kind of 1920s Soviet thing, you've got the fantasy with the dwarves, and you've got this industrial setting where they're trying to create stuff and build things. And it's a Euro game. In fact, it's a semi-cooperative worker placement game with a cube tower. So players are going to be working together to do certain things. They're going to have common goals that they're trying to achieve together. However, they're also going to be incentivized in individual levels. And so there are going to be times within this semi-cooperative play where they're going to want to take that camaraderie of those shared goals and just trample over them with opportunism and do what they need to do and get it done. And then go back to working on the shared goals. So there's kind of a push and pull, and that's why it's semi-cooperative in terms of, what are you working on together, and then when and how are you kind of breaking out to do your own thing and screw over your other players somewhat. And then maybe they're going to be a little less incentivized to work with you after that, or a little less trusting of you. But they're still going to want to work with you because there still will be those shared goals that they're going to want to complete. And I think that's where the game shines. It's got a very unique theme, but mechanically it has some interesting things going on as well. Now, it's designed by Timo Multimaki, who's also worked on Black Hat, Perdition's Mouth, Abyssal Rift, and the Phantom League. And most recently, there was a campaign on Gamefound where they did a new version of Black Hat called White Hat. The artist here is Lars Monk, who's worked on Darwinning, Dwarf, and Meishao and Orkney Saga. And the game is being published by Dragon Dawn Productions, and they've previously published Meishao, Perdition's Mouth, Abyssal Rift, and the Phantom League. So it's Timo Multimaki's company, I believe. They're publishing all of his games. Now, this game was on crowdfunding once before. It was on Kickstarter a couple of years ago. It came out. It's got, I think, fairly good feedback, fairly good reviews. People seem to like it, but it didn't make a huge impression. It's not a game that people are really talking about. So I think this was an opportunity for them to go back, get a second shot at it, and then also upgrade some of the elements of the game. So consequently, there's two different pledge levels here. There's an upgrade kit, and that is the first pledge level. So $22, you can pledge the upgrade kit. And that's going to give you entirely new cards with redone art and kind of graphics, as well as new player boards. So if you have the previous version of the game and you want to make it a little prettier, a little nicer, and upgrade to the new reworked version, you can just pledge for that upgrade kit. If you haven't pledged the game before and you're doing it for the first time here, then you want to pledge for $70, the Commissar pledge, and that's going to get you the new version of the game and basically everything. Now, one little note though, there are multiple versions of that Commissar pledge for different languages, so just make sure that you are choosing the correct version for you. There are also a few add-ons with some additional upgraded items. The first of these is only $1, and it is a special first player token. So it just upgrades the first player token that comes with the base game. For $4, you're going to add on 3 promo events. So there are events that are going to come out every round. They're going to change a little bit what's happening in the round, maybe good things, bad things. But if you want these extra event promo cards, $4. They've also created another special set of event cards to benefit Ukraine. For $10, you can get the Pro Ukraine promo deck, and that's going to include 9 more event cards. So if you get that one and the one before it, the $4 one, that is 12 additional event cards to give more variability to your game. Now, because you're playing a game that has dwarves and you're working kind of in an industrial mine-like setting, there are these cardboard carts in the game that are going to hold resources. If you want to upgrade those to resin carts, that is $13, and that is called Pimp My Ride. Also, for $22, you can add on a copy of Dwarf, which is another game from Dragon Dawn Productions. And obviously there's some thematic synchronicity since both games are themed around dwarves. Now, for continental US shipping, if you're just getting the upgrade pack, it's $10. If you're getting the new version of the game, it's $19. And currently, Dragon Dawn Productions is planning on delivering this new version of Factory 42 in October of this year. Next on my list is the Western Legends Big Box, and this one's going to be back on Kickstarter, not Gamefound. This project had a minimum required funding goal of $30,000. They currently have $319,000, which is about 10.5 times that minimum required funding goal. Western Legends Big Box is also going to fund on Monday, March 14th. The game itself plays 2 to 6 players in about 1 to 1.5 hours. Complexity on the game is medium heavy, and I'm going to set the risk associated with this campaign at medium low. If you haven't played Western Legends before, it's a very kind of open sandboxy game. It runs off of, I believe, action points and cards also. So you're going to be drawing cards, there's some hand management involved, and then you can do different things around this Western setting, like different things. There's pick up and deliver missions. If you want, you can go to the gambling hall, the saloon, and gamble. Players also can kind of choose at the beginning of the game whether they want to play a criminal or a lawman. And there are contracts that you can do for either thing. And if you're a lawman, you can actually go to the other players who are criminals and arrest them. And there's an interesting metric about how, your alignment goes. And so players can switch at different points in the game. I think just once, if I remember correctly. So like if you're a criminal and people are just bagging on you and everyone's throwing you on jail, which happened to me in one game, you can decide to change your alignment and switch over to the good side. But there's different mechanics that work with whether you're a criminal or a lawman. So you may want access to those abilities, and you may or may not want to switch what you are. But those are some of the choices in the game and some of the different things you can do. And they've put out a couple different expansions already, Ante-Up and Blood Money, which add in more stuff, as well as promo packs and kind of little mini expansions and things. So the game is designed by Hervé Lemaitre, who, this is his thing. Western Legends is really the thing that he's done, and he's worked on all of the different parts of it so far over the past few years. The artist on this one, Roland McDonald, in addition to Western Legends, has also worked on Battle Line, Undaunted Normandy, Undaunted North Africa, and Werewords. And the publisher is Colossal Games, and they have put out Mezzo, Omen, A Reign of War, and Terrors of London. Now, the purpose of this campaign is really to produce a big box for the game that will hold everything previously made, as well as a wooden insert just for organizing and storage. So there's not any new expansions or anything like that in terms of gameplay content, but there are some new cosmetic add-ons. And so the way these pledges are going to go, if you want all of those cosmetic add-ons, you want to pledge at the highest pledge level. If you don't want to pledge at that level because you already have Western Legends stuff, because that highest pledge level is going to include everything. But if you're someone who has the game, has a lot of the other parts, then you'll just want to add them on piecemeal. And I'll go over that when we get to the add-on section. However, if you're somebody who has everything Western Legends and you don't want the big box or the organizer, there is still something here that you may want, which are the new promo cards. So for $7, you can pledge just the goods. It's going to give you, I think it's 5 promo cards that are all centered around this character, Aaron Ross. So if you have everything Western Legends already, you don't want the new kind of storage stuff, you can at least get that if that's what you want. And then you could add on the other cosmetic stuff as add-ons. For $60, just the box, you're going to get the new big box and this elaborate, highly produced wooden organizer. And I believe the promo cards also do come with that pledge level. I believe they come with every pledge level. It's just that you can get them by themselves if you don't want this other stuff. Moving on from there, for $269, the pledge level called New in Town, that will get you all of the previously produced content. So that's going to be the base game, the 2 kind of big expansions, Ante-Up and Blood Money, as well as all of the little stuff. The little kind of mini expansions, the promos, all of those things. If you want to see more about them, you can go to the Kickstarter campaign. Now, moving up from there, the next pledge level is $398. It is called All In. Actually, it's All In. It's 5 L's. And that's going to get you everything previously produced, plus those expansions, and then kind of all of the new cosmetic stuff. So that's going to include a hardcover rulebook, which will unite all of the rules from all of the other things, the base game, the expansions, any of the little errata. It'll put all in one hardcover book. You'll also get plastic cattle tokens, 3D buildings, these plastic chips that are going to be an upgrade for the components in the Ante-Up expansion, playmat, metal coins, and card sleeves. So that's everything. That's everything old, everything new. That's the all in. Now, if you want some of those things piecemeal, we're going to run through the add-on prices. That starts with the base game. If you're getting the base game as an add-on, $75 for the base game. $45 for the Ante-Up expansion. $35 for the Blood Money expansion. $30 for Fistful of Extras. $15 for Wild Bunch of Extras. And $15 for the Good, the Bad, and the Handsome. So these are kind of upgrade things that were available previously. The playmat as an add-on is $35. The plastic chip upgrade pack for use with Ante-Up is $30. The plastic cattle token upgrade is $10. The 3D buildings are $35. The hardcover rulebook is $35. The Man in Black 2019 Promo Paradise promo is $2. The Man in Black 2020 Dice Tower promo pack is $5. The Carbine 2019 Dice Tower promo is also $5. The Metal Pharaoh bid markers are $12. The sleeve pack is $30. And then when they did the Ante-Up expansion previously on Kickstarter, there were some wooden organizer items that came with that, kind of for cards and resources and things. And this insert is designed to incorporate those into it. So some people already have those. If you don't have that, you need to get that now. So it's $10 for the wooden LTS General Store, $5 for the wooden LTS Trading Post, and $5 for the wooden LTS Traveling Trader. Now, as far as continental US shipping goes, if you're just doing those promo cards for $7, shipping's already included. It's free. You're good. If you're doing just the box, US shipping is estimated at $23. If you're doing either of the 2 higher pledge levels that include a lot of stuff, New in Town or the All In, $38 estimated for continental US shipping. And finally, Colossal is currently planning on delivering the Western Legends big box and all of this stuff in June of 2023. So more than a year out, not this summer, 15 months from now. Tang Garden Seasons is also on Kickstarter. That project had a minimum required funding goal of $16,500. They are currently at $541,000, which is 16 and a half times that minimum required funding goal. Now, this one's going to complete its funding on Thursday, March 17th. The game plays 1 to 4 players in about 40 to 60 minutes. Complexity is medium heavy, and I'm going to set the risk associated with this campaign at medium low. Now, this is a very, 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 very highly produced game that uses tile placement, variable player powers, set collection. Essentially what players are doing is they're placing characters and different elements like trees and things out on a board. They even place tableau type screens. So there are these, kind of pieces of cardboard, and you can slot them around the 4 sides of the board to create vistas that you're looking at. And there are places on each side of the board to put multiple screens. There's some smaller ones, there's some bigger ones. So as you do this and you layer them, you're going to be creating a vista that maybe a character is looking at. And those vistas will have symbols on them. And so that's kind of where the set collection comes in. You're assembling these different elements to kind of fulfill a contract, really, set collection. And the one real hang up with this game, I think people think it's gorgeous, they love it, I think it's beautiful, there's plastic pieces, all of the components just look so nice. But when we get into the pricing of this game later, you're going to see why it's prohibitive. In fact, the gameplay to me feels like it's more in the medium light area, but it is classed as a medium heavy game based on the ratings. And I think part of that is the same thing that is the main criticism of this game, which I think you should know about. Even though I'm talking about it and it looks like a really cool game, and I think medium weight gamers are really going to like it, especially those who like set collection. There is a kind of a problem with this game. First of all is the cost and the fact that it's so highly produced. But as you are placing these very cool, very highly produced, plastic components and things down into the setting, and the different screens around the side. Visualize this for a minute here. So you've got a board, and you've got place for all of these screens to be plugged in on the 4 sides. What that means is that as you start to place a lot of these pieces on all 4 sides of the board, you're no longer really looking at a board anymore. You're now looking at what resembles more of a box, like an empty box. It has things in it, so it's not empty, but a box with sides on it. And so everyone who plays this game reports that it becomes hard to see things because you're trying to look down and see into this box. In some cases, you're trying to look from a certain perspective to see what the character is seeing. So that means, kind of standing in weird positions, trying to look down, trying to look around things that are on the board and see different parts of it. And it is problematic for gameplay, particularly, depending on how you're sitting around the table, it might make it hard to see things from different angles. And if you don't have really good lighting, it can be hard to make out what you're seeing or see some of the symbols in the iconography. And I think for a game that is this well produced and looks gorgeous, and you see it and you want to play it, it's not that complicated because it's set collection. There's not that much going on really, but it feels fun and compelling to play. And then for all of the effort and all of the money and production that was put into this game, there is this kind of hang up with the gameplay. So it may not bother you, and if that is the case, that is awesome and you should enjoy the game. But I think it's something that people should know ahead of time before they, let's say, they've never played it before and they decide to go out on a limb and do an all-in pledge. I think they want to know that before they do that. So consider yourselves not necessarily warned, but provided information. Now, we're talking mainly about this expansion, Seasons, for Tang Garden. And the only kind of carryover from the base game is one of the 2 designers. So So there are now 2 designers on this expansion. One of them is new. His name is Pierpaolo Paletti, and he has previously worked on Spirits of the Forest Moonlight, which is an expansion. So if you were to look at his entry on BGG, you're not going to see a rating, like a ranking for that game. Ratings, yes, you'll have ratings on expansions, but you won't see rankings. Expansions are never given rankings. So that is his only creation, though, is that. I think maybe he has one other that also isn't ranked. That's not as well known. But that's it. He's relatively new. Francesco Testini is the carryover, and he has previously worked on 15 Days, the original Tang Garden, and a game called Xeon, and that is spelled Xi''AN. So if you hear me saying it, but you want to go look it up, it begins with an X. It's called Xeon. Of the 2 artists on this expansion, Andrew Bosley, a great artist. I think he does fantastic art. He has previously worked on Blood Bowl Team Manager, the card game, Citadels, Everdell, Mission Red Planet 2nd Edition, and Tapestry. And the other artist, Sergio Chavez, has previously worked on Dwellings of Eldervale, Rise of Tribes, and Sansuchi. And the publisher, Thundergrift Games, has previously put out Owari, Spirits of the Forest, and Tang Garden. So there are 4 different pledge levels for Tang Garden. They're relatively simple. For $50, you can pledge Tang Garden Seasons. That's the new expansion. For $94, you can pledge Tang Garden Seasons plus base, and that's going to get you the base game and the new expansion, Seasons. For $177, you can pledge the Tang Garden Architects Collection. It's going to get you everything produced for Tang Garden except for the base game. So the idea here is that you already own the base game, nothing else. You love it. You want to get everything. So of course, you'll be getting the new expansion, but you'll also be getting the new big box for it, a Game Trays modular storage solution, a new rulebook compendium that will kind of unite all of the rules that have been out there in the past with their various items, the Ghost Stories and Golden Age expansions, which were produced previously, metal coins, upgraded wooden lanterns that are for use with Seasons. So they're upgraded components from what you'll be getting normally with Seasons, and some additional added components, kind of like smaller modular expansion type things. There is an apricot tree, the Wayfarer, the Herbalist, and the Swan. So you'll get all of that stuff with that pledge level. Now, if you want that and you want the base game, then you want to pledge at the $211 Tang Garden Complete Collection. It'll give you all of those things in the previous pledge plus the base game. If you want to get some of those things, maybe you pledged Tang Gardens before, you have some of those other expansions like Golden Age, Ghost Stories. So if you want some of the new stuff and you want to kind of piecemeal it, add it on, here are the prices for that. For $6, you can add on the apricot tree. For $6, you can also add on the Swan. For $6, you can also add on the upgraded wooden lanterns that are going to be used in Seasons. For $8, you can add on the Wayfarer. For $11, you can add on the Herbalist. For $33, you can add on metal coins. And for $38, you can add on that Game Tray system. Now, they're also doing this thing where they're upgrading the minis that were in the game previously, and they're also giving you stickers to replace some of the symbols in the game. So it's kind of a whole pack. If you are a returning backer and you're getting Seasons, you can add that on for free. So it'll upgrade the minis in your old version of the game, and it'll give you these new stickers to make the symbols on things bigger. Now, if you backed Tang Garden before, but you're not going to be backing Seasons this time around, you can still get that pack, but it's going to cost you $11. If you are a current backer, no matter whether you backed before or not, and you are backing Seasons, you can get that pack for $6, which means that people who backed it before and are in again get it for free. People who are backing now get it for $6, and people who backed before and aren't backing it this time can get that for $11. So the price kind of increases the less involvement that you have with backing their whole project. Now, for continental US shipping, if you're just getting Seasons, you're looking at $15 in shipping. If you're getting Seasons and the base, you're looking at $20. And if you're getting either of the 2 larger pledges with a lot of stuff, they're estimating that shipping at about $22. And Thundergriff Games is planning on delivering Tang Garden seasons in February of 2023. So again, not this year, it's a year out, 2023. From there, we're headed back to Gamefound for Warpgate Beyond. This campaign had a minimum required funding goal of $5,500. They currently have $20,500, which is about 3.5 times that minimum required funding goal. Warpgate Beyond is also going to complete its funding on Thursday, March 17th. The game plays 1 to 6 players in about 1 to 1.5 hours. The complexity level on the game is medium heavy, and we're going to set the risk on this campaign at medium high. Now, this is a space-themed game of hand management and area control between fleets of starships on a hex-based modular board. Players are going to be doing things like establishing colonies and outposts and engaging in battle with other players' starships. The designer, Artyom Nikiforov, previously worked on Guards of Atlantis, Tabletop MOBA, Trickshot, and the original Warpgate, because this game is an expansion to Warpgate, right? It's called Warpgate Beyond. Unfortunately, none of the artists are credited, so I can't tell you who the artists are, which is a little weird because sometimes that happens when a game is in production. It shouldn't, but sometimes it does, and sometimes the rule book is, not in a finished state and they haven't added credits into it. And so that's always a good place that I can go if it's not on Board Game Geek, if they haven't mentioned it within the campaigns. Usually I can at least check a rule book if there's a rule book provided to find out who the artists are. However, they're not listed in the rule book, and they're not even in the completed rulebook for the previous game, which has already been out for a while. So it's unfortunate that the artists aren't credited, but such is the case. So I can't tell you who they are. Now, the game is being published by Wolf Designa, which is Artyom Nikiforov's company. So they have the same credits that he does. Guards of Atlantis, Tabletop MOBA, Trickshot, and the original Warpgate. Now, if you have the old game, you just want to pledge the new stuff, you want the $17 pledge level. It's called Warpgate Beyond. It's going to have a bunch of kind of new additions that you can throw into the game. Just a lot of new everything. The kind of thing that you want to put into a game if you've played it a lot and you're kind of running thin through it and you kind of need to bulk up stuff. So it's going to have new objectives, new tactics, new technologies, and a new solo AI deck. And then this is kind of interesting. There's a 4-player version of the game and a 6-player version of the game. So for $50, you can pledge Warpgate Beyond plus base. That is the 4-player version of the game. For $65, you can pledge Warpgate Beyond plus base, and that is the 6-player version of the game. Now for $10, you can add on extra dashboards, which are essentially player mats, the factions. And this is going to get you 16 factions. They're 8 double-sided. It is 4 factions beyond what is in the original game. So it's going to give you more choices, more factions that you can play with. I don't believe that that is an upgrade to 6 players because I don't think that there are more components, more ships and things for the extra players. It is just the faction boards. For $13, you can add on a 2018 promo. It was an exploration tile, something that you didn't get in the base game, a little bit different, as well as additional exploration tokens. And then finally, for $32, you can add on an organizer. It's an insert made out of trench-type cardboard from Frontier Wargaming. Continental US shipping is $13 or $16. So if you're pledging just for the new expansion, it's $13. If you're pledging for the expansion with either of the base games, it's going to be $16. And then finally, Wolf Designa is planning on delivering Warpgate Beyond in December 22 at the end of this year. The final game on this list is also on Gamefound. It's called Pilgrim. They had a minimum required funding goal of $26,000. They're currently at $28,000, which is funded. It's just a little over 1 time their minimum required funding goal. However, they still have more time left than the other games. They're not completing their funding until Sunday, March 20th. Pilgrim is a game for 1 to 4 players. It plays in about 1 to 2.5 hours. Complexity on this game is heavy, and we're setting the risk associated with this campaign at high. Now this one is kind of unique and interesting looking to me. It's set in medieval times with these, kind of pilgrims who traveled around the lands. Players are going to be creating trade routes for travel and these pilgrim trails that the pilgrims would travel on. It uses things like tile placement and worker placement. It also has a Mancala mechanic. And everyone that has played it has been very impressed by that Mancala mechanic, saying that the game kind of advances the mechanic in a way that other games haven't really done before. And it makes for a lot of player interaction, which is something that isn't always the case with Mancala. It's also got an 18xx style of tile development within the game. The designer is Nick Case, who's worked on The Front Nine, NIMBY, and Tales of the Northlands, The Sagas of Noggin the Nog. The artist, Harold Lieski, has previously worked on The Castles of Burgundy, Dominion, Dominion Intrigue, Power Grid, and Puerto Rico. The publisher is Amusement, which is Nick Case's company, so just as with his credits, they've put out The Front Nine, NIMBY, and Tales of the Northlands, The Sagas of Noggin the Nog. Now this one is super simple. There's one pledge. It is $86. It is called Pilgrim. For US shipping, it's $24. So if you're pledging the game, there's nothing extra to add on. It's just that $86 pledge plus the $24 in shipping for a grand total of $120. And then Amusement is planning on delivering Pilgrim in October of 2022. One last thing there, they do not plan to go to retail. They're producing a limited number of games just through this crowdfunding campaign on Gamefound. So if this is something that sounds like it might be interesting to you, maybe the medieval theme or the Mancala mechanic being used in new and interesting ways here, or the inclusion of some kind of 18xx mechanics in the tile development. Maybe those are all things that have you very interested in this game. I'd recommend going over, looking at it on Gamefound. If you do think you're interested, you should pledge it now. It's not going to retail. They're just producing a limited number of these games for this campaign. That done, let's now move on to the games that I backed from last week's video. If you watched last week's video and you remember, I covered 5 currently running campaigns last week as well. I kind of went crazy and I backed 4 of those games. It was a big week for me. So the only game that I did not back was Earth. And I suppose if I had all the money in the world and all of the space in the world, I would have backed that too. It looks like an interesting, pretty good game. It just is samey compared to some other things that are out there. I talked about that a little bit in last week's video. It still looks like a really good game. I'd recommend anyone who's interested in it, to have backed it. But at some point I have to draw a line and I can't back everything. So on weeks where I'm doing well with my wallet, I backed nothing or maybe one thing. Last week was a big week and I backed 4 things. So first on that list was 51st State Ultimate Edition. This is essentially the same game as Imperial Settlers, just a different theme. It's a post-apocalyptic theme, and the game is a tableau builder. It has players kind of doing hand management, putting out cards into their tableau, using those to collect resources, kind of building it out. Depending on what faction you're playing, there can be more player activity with attacking and things like that. And I've always liked the 51st State theme better. It's just that when I originally acquired the game, there was only one small expansion for 51st State, and there were many expansions and a lot of support for Imperial Settlers. So I got Imperial Settlers. I think I got one faction expansion and maybe a smaller expansion. And I've enjoyed it, but I've always known that I enjoy 51st State more. So this was my opportunity to acquire that one, and then when I do, I'll be selling off my copy of Imperial Settlers. I also backed Kingdoms Forlorn, Dragons, Devils, and Kings. It's the new game from the team that's doing Aeon Trespass Odyssey. That game is a super highly produced, enormous dungeon crawler that's doing things that I don't think have really been done before quite the same way. It's a huge sprawling game. And so this one's going to be a huge sprawling game as well. And Trespass Odyssey is coming this year. It's delivering this year, and I think they're at the point now where they know that they can work on their next game. In fact, probably part of their team needs a new game to be working on. So they've already had this one in development for a while, and it completed its funding last week. And it's just going to be this massive sprawling dungeon crawler. I hope to eventually feature it and streaming, whether that's Twitch or YouTube or however I decide to do it. But that's something that I'm going to be building my channel towards in the future, is streaming games. And I want to have a good portion of those being campaign games. And in my opinion, from what I know of it, Aeon Trespass Odyssey and now this new one look like two of the best, most unique, ambitious big campaign games out there. So it was a big chunk of change. I dropped it, and hopefully when the game delivers, it will be worth it. It's a massive thing, but it looks very, very cool. I also backed Tindaya, which is sort of a spiritual successor to Spirit Island with kind of similar gameplay. Players are on islands and they're trying to keep invaders off. I suppose in that sense, they're really just kind of tower defense games, aren't they? Because in both of those games, you're playing these tribes that are trying to fend off colonizers, and they're using, different forces of nature or gods that represent those forces of nature to help them strategically. So I think Spirit Island is an amazing game, and I'm really curious to see what Tindaya does with the formula. Felt like a good game to back for me. So I was impressed enough, I did it. I think this one was a higher risk game just because the designers and publisher haven't really done much. But I was impressed. I was impressed enough to be able to take that leap. And then finally, I backed Unsettled board game plus all new content. I backed it the first time around. Unsettled is definitely up there in my probably top 5 of this last year. And we'll be getting to my top games of 2021 eventually, and 2022. I'm right now working to get my best games of 2020 up, so I'm a little behind the curve right now. I will get there, but I really, really like Unsettled. It's one of the best cooperative games I think I've ever played. There's a lot of variability in it. It's kind of a game system, and then the original game came with 6 different planets, and essentially each different planet is a variant with a different environment and different mechanics and different kinds of things you're going to be interacting with. And then each of those planets has 3 different goals. So those are variants within the variants. And in this new campaign, they were offering 3 new planets, plus the ability for anyone who hasn't gotten it to pick up everything, as well as some new goal cards for the previous planets. So you used to have 3 goal cards for each of those planets. They've added 4 more in, so now there's 7 for each planet. So a lot of variability, a lot of kind of variance within variance, and really, really smart, clever writing. Okay, remember at the start of this video, I said the writing for Descent, Legend of the Dark is just pretty awful. The reverse is true for Unsettled. Unsettled is so well written, clever, funny. The way that it takes this dire situation of being astronauts on alien planets and interacting with those planets' surfaces and how dangerous it can be, and the fact that when you play that game, you're going to die more often than not. It is really hard to beat those games. So there is sort of darkness to the situation, but the writing in the game is colorful and clever and tongue-in-cheek, and it just makes it even more of a joy to play. It's also extremely well produced. For my money, the companies that are producing the best produced games, like the most highly produced games that are also really good games, is Chip Theory, which does Too Many Bones, Mind Clash, which does Anachrony, Cerebria, Tricarion, and they have Perseverance, Castaway, Chronicles delivering soon, and then probably Orange Nebula is now on the scene. They did Vindication, and they've now done Unsettled. So they only have 2 games. They've done multiple campaigns now for each of those games, but there is a lot of joy and heart and high quality control and awareness going into the games that they're making. So I just have high praise for Orange Nebula and for Unsettled, and I'd recommend it to anybody who likes heavy-ish cooperative games that are difficult, that you will need to fail a lot to win, but that will be very fun going through that process. If that kind of game sounds appealing to you, this is one of the best of its kind. Finally, I have 2 games that I've acquired into my collection since the last time I did a Kickstarter weekly. The first of those is Canvas Reflections, which I skipped the first time around because I have several painting games already. Also, the card sleeve thing is not really anything new. I mean, they did it in Mystic Vale. So I think between those 2 things, the fact that the mechanic wasn't really anything new and the theme is something that I already own a few games in, I thought Canvas looked cool the first time it came out on Kickstarter. I just didn't feel that I needed to back it. But then the game delivered. It did really well. I mean, people really loved it. And so I think when something lands that way and it just generates a lot of enthusiasm and goodwill, it becomes a game that I really need to take a look at, I think, and know something about. So when the Reflections campaign, the expansion was up, I went ahead and I backed the base and the new expansion. I probably actually will be playing it next week during my little birthday trip. And then I also received Meeples Monsters, which is a new game from AEG and Ole Steinus, who is the designer for Champions of Midgard, which is a game that I own. I don't know if it's back here. Can you see it? But I do own Champions of Midgard, plus both expansions and a playmat. I really, really like it. So I gave Meeples Monsters a really good look when that was on Kickstarter. And it reminded me a lot of Lords of Waterdeep with bag building. So it's got this fantasy theme. You're going to have adventures. You're sending them out on missions and things. But you're going to be taking them from a bag. And depending on what colors of meeples you get will depend on how you can use them. It sounded like a really interesting take on Lords of Waterdeep or adjacent to Lords of Waterdeep. And I think that kind of game, too, is also just a really good game to bring new gamers in. It's not too complex. There's a lot of fun things going on. Easy to teach. So I'm hoping to get that one played soon-ish, but I have a lot of stuff to get through more realistically before I can get to that. We are now coming to the end of this video, but before I wrap things up, I just wanted to say that I do have a video series I'm working on right now. It is my 100 most anticipated games of 2022. I will link down below in the description the first video. So if you haven't checked it out, you can go look at it. The first video talks about my 10 honorable mention games. The second and third ones, my 50 most anticipated expansions and redesigns of games that have been previously published, later editions. So not new games. So the actual series, I guess in earnest, if you're just looking at the new games, starts with video 4. And I've put out 4, 5, and 6. I have 7 and 8 left. I'm going to be working on 7 this weekend, and then 8 maybe through the week if I can get to it before I leave on that birthday trip, and I'll be finishing it up next weekend. So that's the plan for that. I think it's a really great tool, a great resource for people to look at and just kind of know what's coming later in this year, both in terms of games that are going to be delivered, from crowdfunding, which will then be hitting retail, most of them, and a bunch of games too that are just straight to retail games. But these are my 100 most anticipated games of 2022. You may say that's a lot of games, to which I would reply then I should be hitting most of the games that you would be excited about if I'm kind of going above and beyond and profiling 100 different games, plus the 50 expansions and reprints and later editions, plus the 10 honorable mentions. So 160 games in total that I'm talking about in this series. Check it out. I think it's a really cool series and a resource worth availing yourself of. Also, please remember to like this video and subscribe. And if you want to be notified whenever I publish videos in the future, you can also hit the alarm bell after you've subscribed. Thank you much for watching. Thank you much for spending some time with me. I hope I gave you some information that was helpful and useful to you. I'm going to be playing some cool games this week. I hope you are too. And I'll see you very soon with the next Kickstarter Weekly next week. And then over the next week to 2 weeks, the last 2 videos in that series. Take care and see you soon.